Anderson heaving one down the sideline, and he's got Cass Allen over the top. Big side, down the sideline. Touchdown. His signature move and his signature performance. Allen, deep ball one more time. 58 yards this time.
You're listening to the Bruin Bible. This is your host, Will Decker, bringing you UCLA football content all throughout the year for LA Football Network.
Up, LAFB fans, you are listening to the Bruin Bible right now, but we want to bring to you our sponsor for the show. It's Bet Online. Our partners at Bet Online continue to be the number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all of the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's Wimbledon finals. I know our guy Madman will be all over that. The big tennis fan of the bunch. Major League Baseball, Dodgers in the midst of a big-time season, highest payroll in the league, 3 MVPs in the lineup. Can they figure it out? The latest fighting news, a huge MMA fight coming up this weekend for the UFC, and even next season's early NFL futures. I know you guys will be hammering the Rams and Chargers overs on the futures for next season. Head to our website to use your mobile device to sign up today to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code LAFB to get the bonus and get into the action. Bet Online, where the game starts. What is up, and welcome to a special edition of the Bruin Bible. Will Decker, your host. I'm joined by a longtime friend of the program from the Bruin Bible, a guy who came on last year, and we had so much fun we had to bring him back. A guy I like to call the BB gun, Bryan Brown, in the house from UteZones. He's our favorite guy who covers the Utah Utes. BB gun, how are you doing today, my man?
Never better than when I'm hanging out here with you and the rest of the crew on the Bruin Bible. I got to be honest, man.
Bruin Bible, it all adds up.
Me and the letter B, that's what we're all about. I'm in the Beehive State. I have a podcast on the side called the Beehive Boys, where we just talk about shenanigans and basic internet posse stuff. Consider ourselves the Jordan Clarkson of the podcast world. So like whatever it is that starts with the letter B, I'm here for it. But more than anything, I'm excited to be here tonight talking to you and breaking things down. I feel like it's been too long, to be honest with you. Like it just my heart gets a little bit smaller. I'm like reverse Grinch when we don't get to talk Pac-12 and everything else. So,
dude, I completely agree, and like I think we're gonna have you on at least 3 times as much this year if we can. It's all dependent on your schedule. The door is always open for our guy BB Gun to come on through. We got a fun topic though for today. Yeah. We are going to be breaking down the top 5 units on the defensive side of the ball. Now we did the quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receiver rooms. We're going to be doing the defensive lines. And after some further investigation, I think there is a lot of great D lines that are not getting the credit that they deserve nationally. There's 2 teams that really stand out at the top. I think when it comes to the D lines, we're going to get into that. But Bryan, how was the process of breaking down the top 5, units within the West Coast of college football?
It's a lot more difficult than one might assume, because I think it's been such a wild year in college football in terms of turnover. Your leading sack leader in the conference is now gone to the NFL, but the bigger part of it is just there's so much rollover in terms of the transfer portal, right? Like, I mean, ASU is a program where we kind of watch them struggle for a little bit, and they dip into the portal, and all of a sudden now their defensive line looks really strong. Utah, it's a little bit different, right? They're trying to replace reload, but it's a program that's been consistently at the top in the Pac-12 in terms of sacks and limiting rush yards. So you always have to give them consideration, but at the same time, is that enough? They're replacing a really talented player, Mika Tafua, and even more so with Devin Lloyd. Is there a guy out there that can be, their star? So it's a very difficult process. And the other thing too is it's just there's a lot of underrated D lines in this conference, man.
Dude, you said it. You nailed the nail on the head. There's so many underrated D lines, and I felt bad about excluding these 2 teams from my top 5. I know you may have one on your list, but I want to get into the reasons as to why Washington and ASU just missed the cut for me. 2 very talented rooms when it comes to, the defensive line and what they bring to the table. I feel particularly bad about Arizona State, and shout out to Saturday Out West for, promoting a really good article when it comes to the D lines within the conference. You look at what they're bringing in with Nesta Jade Silvera, a defensive tackle coming in from Miami. this guy can make some serious plays for them and was a very solid, impactful player at Miami. And then you couple that on top with a guy named BJ Green, and this is per PFF. He had only 3 guys ahead of him when it came to the 4th best win rate within the conference last year. That was Kayvon Thibodeau, that was Gabe Reed, and that was Micah Tafua. So, I mean, when you talk about the elite of the elite pass rushers, BJ Green was up there for ASU. I have them just on the outside looking in. I felt like there were some more stronger units when it came to that area. And then the team that I believe you have on your list is Washington, the Huskies. They return about 68.2% of their pressures. They've got this guy nicknamed ZTP. It's Zion Tapula-Fatui, who is a first-team all-conference edge rusher, coming into this year. It sounds like that's going to be a projectable thing. And then you couple that with the fact that they've got a guy in Tuli Liachinoa. And by the way, it's a mouthful. I apologize if I botched that at all. Who is a guy on the interior that they're very high on as well. The talent level is there, but just coming off the stats that I saw last year, 3.7 sack rate, 80% in short yard situations or allowing a first down. There was just a lot of areas I was not comfortable with. And with Kalen DeBoer coming in, who's more of an offensive-minded coach, I think there's a lot of talent in there, and they're a team that's on the fringe. But what made you put them in your top 5 when it came to the list?
Yeah, it's just the top of the cream of the crop there. And you talked about Zion, who coming off the Achilles injury, hasn't really been able to recapture that initial first round buzz. And I think last year, a lot of it was just, there was so much discussion about that dude up in Oregon that tore everybody apart, until he finally met his match in Utah, which it's very rare that Utah gets to celebrate anything. So I'll hang a little point on our blackboard for that one. But that's that group. And you mentioned Latulaga Sanoa, who, like, those Polynesian names out here in Utah are all over the place. So I've been working on my pronunciation too. He's just an absolute beast. And really what's unique about that Washington front is that they do a lot in terms of dominating the line of scrimmage to allow, those backers to flow in a 3-4 set. And so I think that, that allows them, because they bring pressure from so many different angles and from so many different areas. And they've been so good in the defensive backfield. It's allowed those guys to get to the quarterback and to have an impact more. And so I think when you're talking about Washington, it's one of those schools where it's like, look across the NFL, like their DBs are everywhere, Yeah. And so if they have some more of those guys in the pipe that can really keep quarterbacks in the pocket, it's going to play to ZTS favor and to Tuli's. I mean, Tuli's not a massive pass rusher. He's just a massive human being. But that plays, up into stopping the run and everything like that. So I do think that Washington has a pretty good squad. We talked a little bit about Arizona State. The transfer portal has been really good to them, and I just don't know if that's going to pay off or not.
Transfer portal, man, it is. I think they got 40-something players in the transfer portal. Have you ever heard of anything that insane before? Because, I mean, Herm Edwards said it at Pac-12 Media Day. We all thought it was like a miscue. We're like, there's no way there's 40. We Googled it. It was like 42, 43 guys coming to Arizona State via the transfer portal. How unreal is that, dude?
It's absurd. And I think it's just indicative of how bad things are at ASU, right? Like you lost every single one of your quarterbacks, and luckily they were able to go get Emory from Florida and have at least a guy with some starting experience. But that program's just, it's been deconstructed. We'll be polite with it, and they're just kind of in shambles right now. And so I really have a hard time, even if there is talent in a room with a program that, like, the culture's in question, like we don't even know how long Herm's going to be there either, right? Like, it could have been very much that they're just like, hey, sanctions are coming. We'll just let Herm dangle here on the wire for a little bit and see what happens. So I have a hard time with that. And just, there are guys out there that I'm really, like I said, that Washington room, cream at the top, I think there's a lot of really good players in there. Arizona State has talent, but I need to see it too.
Yeah, totally fair. And I'm just projecting at this point. I could be completely wrong when it comes to the Washington D-line room. They could be as high as number 3, in my opinion, and everything goes right for them this year. But let's get in the top 5. Was Washington your 5th team? Was that where they were at?
Washington, they're actually at number 4 for me. So I had them at 4. Yeah.
Who's your number 5 team? Let's start it off with you.
Number 5 team for me is actually Washington State. So.
Oh, okay. Very nice.
Mm-hmm. And that's a tough one too, because I'm very curious to see, we know about Ron Stone, right? A very talented individual, but I'm very curious to see how much the progress that Washington State has made under new coach Jake Dickert seeps down to that room, right? Like in years past, it's been a unit that they've really had to build and develop. And so I'm curious to see if that's happened or not. How much of it was how much of last year was a fluke. You can have one great player on a defensive line and still not be a great defensive line. And it's nice to have those kinds of players. We saw like Michigan last year with Hutchinson and the other player slips my name, but having those 2 edge players makes your defensive line just so much more incredible and impressive. And then once those guys were neutralized, they really struggled, right? So that's kind of the thing for me. It's more of a pause, wait and see. I do know what I'm getting with some of those Washington guys, and so that's why I have them where I have them.
I love the pick, man. I'm going to actually shock you on this one. I have them at number 3. I think they're very talented coming off the edge.
Good choice.
Ron Stone, as you mentioned, last year he was a first-team All Pac-12 selection, and I think there's a case to be made. Like coming into this season in terms of production and what they were able to generate from last year, Brennan Jackson and Ron Stone, they could be the 2 best edge rushers, like tandem-wise, coming back within the Pac-12. I really like what they were able to do. Ron Stone last year, 11.5 tackles for a loss, 5 sacks. And the one stat that I really love from Ron Stone, and defensive line coaches around the country are going to love this one. You want your players to finish games strong. Within the entire country last year, he had the second most pressures within the fourth quarter when the game mattered most. This guy had 12 pressures per PFF coming off the edge, behind only Nick Bonito, who was an NFL pick out of Oklahoma last year. Guy was a stud. They generated, between Jackson and Stone, they generated over 70 pressures last year. They had 63 run stops when it came down to it. So these are guys that are versatile. I mean, they're rushing the passer, they're getting out, and they're stopping the run as well. So guys that I really like. And the stat that really stood out to me when it comes, we talked about the edge rushers. They are returning 4 players with over 100 snaps on the interior of the defensive line. They're returning 77.8% of their pass rush pressure from last year and 92.4% of their run stop pressure from last year. So a lot of returning guys. The best tandem of edge rushers within the conference from last year in Brennan Jackson and Ron Stone. I'm high on these guys. I got them at 3. Is that a crazy statement to have them that high?
I don't think so at all. And I think what it really is it's a reason, it's a nod to why Coach Dickert was kept on, right? Because that team was in transition, and he basically changed that whole entire program from, what was supposed to be an offensive juggernaut under, I don't know why.
Mike Leach.
Yeah. Well, Mike Leach, and then, what's his face from Hawaii? Rolovich. I don't know why Coach Rolovich's name slipped my mind. Yeah. Especially after he just dropped that lawsuit for $25 million. But, after that whole charade with Rolovich, Dickert stepped in, really kept the program rolling, turned that team around and made them a defensive juggernaut, really almost on the fly in some respects. And he did a great job at Wyoming beforehand. And that's his bread and butter. So they're going to focus and keep improving it. And really, I think it's cool to see that happen at Washington State. And I'm excited to see what the culture change and everything like that brings for that program, because it's one of the programs that's one of my favorite in the Pac-12.
Go Cougs, man. And it's just cool. Like, when's the last time we've talked about a Pac-12 or a Washington State defense within the Pac-12? I mean, it's a fun kind of conversation to have. They could have a fearsome front 4 this year. Really excited about them. I know number 4 is Washington for you, so I will jump into my number 5 and number 4 teams. It's the most hated team within the conference. If you didn't go there, it's a team nobody really likes. We're the Bruin Bible. We clearly hate these guys. This is our, biggest rival within the Pac-12. It is USC. And there's just so much talent in this room, and I'm projecting forward. Alex Grinch, you can say he doesn't really develop secondary players. You can say he really doesn't develop linebacking units, but he has always done a really good job with the defensive lines in that 3-3-5 scheme. Perrion Winfrey getting drafted out of there, Neville Gallimore, Nick Bonito, guys like these continually come up, and he's done an excellent job of kind of having these guys reach their ceiling and just projecting forward. He's got 2 guys off the edge that I think are going to be game changers for USC defensively next year. Corey Foreman, and you're in the recruiting zone, man. You follow recruiting within high school football for Utah and, for players going to the Utes. Corey Foreman, this guy was the number 1 player on a lot of different recruiting sites. He was number 2 on 24/7. That's not just defensive end position rankings. That's in the entire country. That is for all positions. Corey Foreman has a very high ceiling coming in there. And you pair it with a very talented edge rusher that transferred from Auburn, this guy named Mello Height, 6'3", 230, has a nice speed, the bend off the edge you're looking for. And these are 2 guys that are really going to thrive in the 3-3-5 system. On top of all of that, they bring back, 3 guys on the interior. Brandon Peely, 6'3", 345-pound, 6-year senior defensive tackle. Just a guy you can plug into run situations and feel very comfortable about. And then you got, Stanley Tau Ufuo and Tuli Baluto. I am so bad at pronouncing these dudes. I feel like I'm at like a spelling bee, and I'm asking, like, can you use it in a sentence? Like, can you describe it out? But
Stanley's is a really tough one. When you get that many vowels consecutively, it's a difficult one. Tui Pulotu, that's one that I can kind of roll out there. I had a teammate who was a Tui Pulotu. But the bottom line is, as many vowels and as long as those names are, both of those guys are really stout. I think that's part of why this defensive line, this unit is where it's at. Underperformed last year. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Landing Corey Foreman, an absolute game changer, in my opinion, because as we've seen, the things that really translate well in college football are athleticism. Well, that's why those guys are rated so highly, is because they're the elite of the elite when it comes to athleticism. And, he's number 2 in the country, according to 24/7 Sports, definitely number 1 in USC fans' hearts. So it'll be, you're going to work him in somehow, right? Like, that's a dude that you have to get on the field, and you have to get him doing some stuff for you. And so I just, it's tough. And I'll reveal the curtain a little bit here. Like, I have him at 3, and I hate doing that, but the talent is always there at USC. It's just how it gets used. And we've seen in the past, like, Alex Grinch has done a really good job in the Pac-12. And so I am optimistic that unit will improve. I don't think it means that USC is going to be the conference, darling that a lot of betting sites and fans and whatnot think. I think they still have a lot to do on the offensive line to clean up, and there's still some holes. But I think that defensive line reloaded fairly. You lose a guy like Drake Jackson, and you reload with Corey Foreman. Okay.
It's about as good of a scenario as you can ask for from a coaching standpoint. Ridiculous what USC can do. And they've always recruited. They've not really had the defensive-minded coaches to really maximize that talent. I think with Grinch, at least for the defensive line speaking, I think he's going to be able to get some of those guys there and get them to the NFL. Corey Foreman, I think, could have a breakout year, similar to what Thibodeau had that freshman year. It was basically a redshirt year for Foreman, but look for Foreman to put up big numbers for USC this year. My number 14, this is the Bruin Bible. I've got to include them in this mix. And I'm not just including them just for inclusion's sake. I think this defensive line took a huge step up when you add Gabriel and Grayson Murphy, 2 identical twins, 6'3" coming off the edge, 250 apiece. And yes, they're from North Texas, still a Division I school. But what they were able to generate last year, they combined for 15.5 sacks, 24.5 tackles for a loss. They combined for 91 pressures. When you add that to your unit, that is just a situation where your D-line group takes a huge step forward. And the coolest thing about the Twins is you're not getting one player, you're getting 2 of the identical same dude, So you can put him on the left and the right side. You've got your 2 starting defensive ends. They went out and got Gary Smith III, a starter for an ACC program last year in the defensive tackle to kind of replace Otito Obonia, a guy that will be sorely missed within the UCLA rooms. But Gary Smith kind of eases that transition a little bit. And then you go get a guy like Jacob Sykes, who is one of the top performers within the Ivy League at the defensive tackles. Granted, still a big jump up there, but just having that veteran experience. This is going to be a guy who's entering his 5th year of college football, playing for UCLA next year. I just think this group is good. And I'm not even, talking about the jump that Bo Calvert made off the edge last year, 4 sacks, a guy that really produced. And the unsung hero, the guy that I've been hearing all throughout spring practice is Carl Jones. And Carl Jones has been this athlete where you look at him on the practice field and you go, this guy has it. I don't know what it is, but this guy has it. I think this is finally the year we're going to see Carl Jones, break out, get to that 5, 6, 7 sack range for UCLA if everything goes right. I got to have the unbiased opinion. I got to get BB Gunn's take on this one. BB, am I crazy for putting UCLA at number 4 on this? Oh, you were on mute, my brother.
Oh man, any Utah fans who listen to this know that that's like a I do it every time. I mute myself, and it's just maybe it's because I get so excited to talk. I don't know, but bottom line, it's going to be a better podcast if I mute myself. There's no doubt about that. But I don't think you're crazy. And the hard part about it is that we're right in the zone right there where it's just there's so many units that like they have question marks, but there's talent there and there's reason to believe in them. And I had actually thought about even moving the Bruins into my top 5 as well. Kind of talking myself out of it. And that's the hard part about reading some of these, other articles where they're ranking teams too. But, like Arizona's another team where it's just like, how good is that unit? And then you look at the transfer portal and you're like, well, I got to put Arizona State higher, lower, whatever. And so you kind of just, you gauge it as best you can. But I think that's a unit that I'm really excited to see. I know that it's an emphasis that Chip Kelly has really kind of tried to build, that he believes in the trenches and everything like that. And also knowing Chad Kauhaha coming in there, his reputation, where he comes from, what how he's developed defensive lines at other stops. That's an interesting part of it too. With this group, that they're still moldable. And I think there is some development that can happen with him as the defensive line coach. So I don't think it's crazy, but
that's why we have you on here, man. It's like a therapist situation. I got Bryan telling me I'm not crazy. We love him for that. And you mentioned Kauhaha coming in. Bill McGovern's the new defensive coordinator. And Jerry Azzinaro, this guy was like the most disliked person in UCLA fan bases for years. The defensive coordinator was just kind of abysmal when it came down to the stat lines. You saw just kind of him cost big-time games for UCLA with just dumb defensive situations. And a large part of that was he'd send 7, 8 guys at a time in pass rush situations. It's really great, when you can, generate the pass rush to the quarterback like that. But what happens is you open the hole up for the big play. And the big play happened far too often. We consistently ranked in the hundreds. There's 131 Division I teams, hundreds, Bryan, in pass yards per game allowed. And just go back and throw in that Arizona State game from last year. Go throw in that Fresno State game from last year. We were doing a disservice to our secondary by sending those many guys and just having them in man coverage. So having Bill McGovern in there and having kind of just a front 4 that's going to be, mostly doing the pass rushing, I think it's really going to help out UCLA. And you have the bodies to kind of make that work with the Murphy twins, as I mentioned, and then the Carl Jones and Bo Calvert with the Jacob Sykes and the Gary Smith on the interior. So love that. I got the Bruins at number 4. You've done USC at number 3. You had who's number 4 for you?
Number 4, I had Washington.
Washington, we've gone over. Who's number 5 for you?
That was Wazoo. So
Wazoo. So hey, I think we have the same top 2, and it could be. I have a spoiler. It's going to be the team that this guy reps over here. The Utes from Utah are going to be right there for me. Either Utah number 1, Oregon number 2, or Oregon number 1, Utah number 2. Give me your top 2 teams, man, and why you selected these guys.
So I have to be a homer too. I have to represent my Utes as best as I can. And even though I cover the team and write about them a lot, across a variety of platforms, this squad, and you listen to, defensive coordinator Morgan Scalley and defensive line coach Lewis Powell, they are so impressed by the amount of twitch with this group. And when we look at Utah defensive lines of the past, it's just these big hulking, like unmovable objects in the middle, and maybe a sack specialist on one edge or the other that can get around the corner. And you mentioned that Utah's losing Mika Tafua, the sack leader in the Pac-12 last year, but this is a program that tends to reload on those edges, but they're reloading with a ton of depth, and it's a lot of twitchy depth. New interior defensive line coach Luther Ellis was great at the University of Utah, played in the NFL for many years with the Detroit Lions, comes there from Idaho. His son Jonah is going to be one of the edge players that plays a huge role into it, but he's not even going to start. Van Fillinger, who did a great job evolving last year, will be that anchor defensive end, and that opposite spot's going to be anchored by 3 or 4 different guys. They had Connor O'Toole, who switched over from wide receiver, and now he's up to 245, and everybody's like, who's this guy? But they just have so much. And then you have Junior Tafuna, who is the, defensive freshman of the year. And like he might not even be the best interior defensive lineman on the team, because as I talk to guys up there, they're all like, well, hold on. It's really hard to block Aliki Vimahi. And so you've got all that returning experience with Devin Kafusi. It's a very deep unit. And, for that reason, where it always lacks for Utah is they do not have that elite level talent. There are no Justin Thibodeau's in this unit. There are no Corey Foremans, but they are tough. They work hard. There is a lot of developmental type prospects in that group, and it is extremely deep. So that's why I have him number 1. But listen, I'm not blind. I know what happens at Oregon. One of my old college teammates played at Oregon, and he did pretty well in the NFL. Haloti Ngata. So they know defensive linemen up there at Oregon. And so I'm not going to fault anybody who puts Oregon at number 1.
Yeah. So I have Utah at number 2, but it was close for me. I initially came in with Utah, and then I broke down Oregon, just right after Utah. And I go, as much as I love this Utah unit, I think you guys are going to be a top 20 defensive line within the country, which is very high praise to you guys. I got Oregon at number 1, but let me go into Utah first. I pushed back briefly when you said, the high-level guys. I think Van Fillinger is going to be a guy that's going to be a first or second-round draft pick. The twitch that he has, as you mentioned, man, watching this guy on tape, how athletic he is. This guy was a former Texas commit that, flipped to Utah. 9.5 tackles for a loss and 5.5 sacks in limited snaps last year. We're going to get a full season of this guy. If I'm going to Vegas tomorrow and I'm putting individual bets on guys who I think can lead the Pac-12 in sacks, Fillinger's in my top 3. Like, this guy is a monster. I'm really pumped to get a full season of Fillinger out there on the defensive end. And you mentioned Junior Tafuna. This was the Pac-12 Defensive Freshman of the Year. And if he progresses the way he should, I think this is a guy that, does have that, day 2 talent when it comes to NFL draft picks. And the thing I always tell people is when your sacks are on the interior, it's almost like you double them because they're going against a double team. So for me, it's like I've got to times that by 2. So he had 4.5 sacks coming from the interior last year, taking on double teams each and every play. That's more like 9 sacks for an edge rusher on the outside. So Junior Tafuna is a stud. And then you mentioned, is it Mavi? I'm so bad at pronouncing these names, man.
Miki Sugataranga?
Yes. That guy is that guy's incredible, man. And I got to know him, his story a little bit because his brother was playing on the Ohio State sidelines, for that Rose Bowl game. And I've kind of been following him. Hearing that he might be better than Tafuna, that gives me all the confidence I need to hear in the world that Utah is going to have a strong defensive line. So I'm really looking forward to that. So Utah, we could revisit this at the end of the season, BB, and just see Utah actually being the number 1 team. So I don't think it's crazy to have them at number 1. I've got them at number 2. I think this was the closest debate we've had. Is Utah your number 2 team? Is that correct?
I have Utah at number 1 and Oregon at number 2. And like I said, I know the talent that Oregon has. I also know, the depth that Utah has. And then the unique part about it is the more that you delve into the recruiting world, the more you start to realize that a lot of the guys out here on the West Coast, the Brandon Huffmans, the Greg Biggins, the Blair Angulos, they've seen what Utah's done. And they recognize that when Utah's targeting, you talk about Aliki Vimahi, his older brother was a Utah target as well. And so Utah's had to pivot their recruiting strategy a little bit. They keep a lot of things under the radar. You mentioned Van Fillinger. He was a guy that was committed to Texas right up until the deadline. And then there were all of a sudden, 24 hours beforehand, I start hearing things and I'm just like, wait, what? He's going to Utah. What? And of course, you can never break that news because you want the kids to announce it and make it official. But talking to Van, for example, he's a legit 6'3", 250 pounds. He's as lean as he's ever been since I've seen him. And I watched him as a high school player where he just annihilated schools. He was literally a one-man wrecking crew for that Corner Canyon defense. And, people hear Corner Canyon, they think Zach Wilson, they think Jackson Dart. Corner Canyon is actually a defensive powerhouse. And they got a few more kids. Cash Dillon's a 2024 kid that I guarantee you UCLA fans will hear that name soon. He'll be popping off. Already a 4-star, and he's 6'6", 220-pound prospect, and he'll be great as well. But Van was just that blend of speed and twitch and strength is just really unique. So there's a lot of presence there, but at the same time, like those same recruiting evaluators are watching what's going on at Oregon. And while as great as Kayvon Thibodeau was, like there's still a lot of ability up there in Oregon.
So much ability, and we're going to get to them soon. It's not always that we have, the Utah expert on, that is Bryan. I just want to ask you a question kind of off the cuff here. Utah expected to finish first within the Pac-12 next year. We know the Cam Rises. We know the Tavion Thomases. We know the defensive lines we just went over. Give me a breakout player on offense and defense you think could make impact for the Utes next season.
On offense, I think it's got to be Devon Vele. So he's a 6'4", 250-pound wide receiver. And listen, we all know about the tight ends at Utah. It's Brant Keithy, Dalton Kincaid. If you follow any rankings or publications, you know that those guys have been top 10, kind of neck and neck. Keithy has been so good at tight end that he actually worked at wide receiver in the spring in order to try and develop some of those skills. And look, the tape speaks for itself on both of those guys. Dalton Kincaid does not drop balls, and he's a former basketball player out of Liberty in Nevada. And so that's, again, more under the radar finds. Like there's no 24/7 profile for Dalton Kincaid because nobody thought he was going to play football. But it's Vele is going to be the guy that has to be the impact receiver. And listen, I saw stuff from him in the spring that just had my eyes popping out of my head. Utah's not a wide receiver school. That's why they had Britton Covey for a decade. But like he is a guy that I look at, and then an incoming freshman is kind of like a secondary would be Jalen Glover, the running back out of Florida. And as tragic as the loss of Ty Jordan was, watching him play was so much fun. And Jalen gives us so many shades of Ty's play and his ability to, really be a tough runner, but the momentum and the energy that he runs with. And so Tavion Thomas, look, like the talent is all there, but he's going to have to fight to keep Jalen Glover off the field, and that's a good thing in my opinion. Defensively,
you're not even mentioning Micah Bernard, man. Micah Bernard is an absolute stud. You guys, your running back room is crazy, bro.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing about Bernard is, he played defensive back in the Rose Bowl, and he is such a unique utility player. I think he'll play a lot in filling in that Covey role of being a change of place guy. His catch in the Rose Bowl was incredible, and he's just hit the freaks list for Bruce Feldman. He's on there, and it's legitimate. It's the tools are all there. He's worked out extremely hard. We played at a golf tournament a while back, and I was just like, dude, do you ever leave the gym? And he just kind of looked at me. He's like, nah, this is all natural, man. I just walk around like this. I'm like, okay. But, there is a lot of talent. And I think that's part of the reason why Utah fans are so excited about this team and Cam Rising. He has so many weapons now.
Dude, Cam Rising, I mean, just from a leadership standpoint, I think the last time we've seen that in the Pac-12 where it flipped that quickly was Sam Darnold, inserted for USC. Cam Rising, I mean, it was night and day difference when, Brewer was out there, clearly was not working. I mean, you guys were down at San Diego State. Granted, they had a good season last year. That's a non-Power 5 school. You guys lost to BYU in the opener. When Rising came in, it's not an accident that you guys turned into one of the best teams in the country with him inserted there. I got to ask Whittingham about him at Media Day, and he goes, he's one of the best leaders I've ever been around, period. And, those are the kind of statements that like make your hair stand up on your arms. Like, hell yeah. Like I want to be, in a room with Cam Rising as my quarterback and I'm going out running routes, making plays. So Cam Rising, I'm so pumped for it. Last thing before we get to Oregon, are you coming to Westwood for the Utah UCLA game?
I'm going to try and get to as many as I possibly can. And Westwood is a must visit for me. I was able to make it down for the Rose Bowl, and any chance I get to go to Pasadena, I'm in now. I am obsessed with that place. It was like going to Mecca for me as a college football fan. So yeah, I'm definitely hoping to get down there and, sample the local taco cuisine beforehand and probably some bacon wrapped dogs afterwards.
Well, dude, beer's on me when we come out for that. So I'm excited to get you out into LA for that front. Oregon was my number one defensive line. I totally understand why Utah was yours. It's just a combination of the talent they have returning and just some of the like high level guys that we haven't really even seen. Kind of similar to what SC has with just talented players that were recruited back from the Mario Cristobal days. And just the coach itself that is coming in there, Dan Lanning, the guy that, was the architect with Kirby Smart for that Georgia defense that, for my money, is probably the best defense I can remember since maybe those Miami teams in the early 2000s. I mean, Brian, I really am like, am I missing any defenses in between there? That was up there with the best defenses I've ever seen in college football.
No, it has to be at the top of the list, outside of any defense that may have had Ed Reed on it. And it just, again, the strength of that team for so long at Georgia has been the defensive line. And if Dan Lanning built an elite defensive line, imagine what he's going to do at Oregon with all the talent that they have, and I'm not knocking, previous coaches there at Oregon. They know the recipe. They've got the sauce, right? But you've got DJ Johnson, who's converted finally to be an edge player.
Gosh. Yeah.
Listening to him at Pac-12 Media Days, you're like, this dude is on a mission. Like, he has one goal: to make this last season fun, do everything he can to be there for his teammates, and then he's ready to move on. And if you have that kind of dude, and he is so bought into this new staff, a guy who's been there, a guy who's a leader, a guy who has pull in that locker room, if he's that bought in, I have to believe that a lot of the other guys are as well. And when there's buy-in to that kind of coaching, it like I said, you've got two different programs here with Utah and Oregon. Utah, the stalwart that's been here for so long, Oregon that's got the new staff but has all this talent, and it's two different cultures, but these cultures are building. And I think, for the most part, everybody knows that these are going to be the two best teams in the Pac-12. Now, that's why we love college football, right? Because it could come like wheels off. Like you mentioned, like Utah was terrible in the first 2.5 games of the year. And then finally Cam Rising comes in and like, anybody who'd been around the program knew that Cam Rising was that kind of leader. It was just questions about his shoulder, and he was healthy, and that's all she wrote. So it'll be fascinating to see this season. But I think when you look at the talent, you look at the coaching, Oregon is a dynamite program overall, and that defensive line is going to be mean, nasty, and they're going to come at you from all other angles. That was one huge issue I had with Oregon last year. They put Kayvon Thibodeau on one side, close to the boundary, and just rushed. And that was it. And that guy deserved to be moved all over the field. And you better believe that Dan Lanning's going to do that with his talent this year.
And I'm so glad you brought up DJ Johnson, because you mentioned the Bruce Feldman freaks list. This guy is just it. I mean, former tight end, converted to defensive end. He was almost playing defensive end as a hobby last year, while, daydreaming between tight end and defensive end. Feldman had him with some of the craziest stats that I've heard from a defensive end at 230, 240. According to the article, he ran 22.88 miles per hour on the GPS tracker when they track how fast a guy can go. That's 230, 240 pounds moving that. He has a 455-pound bench press and a 655-pound sumo deadlift. And since he has put his full energy to the defensive line, there was the spring game this year. And if you're talking about the most unblockable player on the field, Lawrence Taylor Jr., so to speak, this guy had 5 sacks in the spring game alone coming off the edge. They put him up against every, left tackle, right tackle they could. Nobody in their right mind could block DJ Johnson, which gets me very excited. And I mentioned that the best returning tandem of edge rushers was Washington State. The best returning tandem of interior defensive linemen are easily the Oregon Ducks. The number one highest graded PFF interior lineman, Popo Amave, he's going to be coming back. He had a nice little grade there. Very good against the run. Just a very, versatile defensive tackle, can rush the passer, really make it, hard for those 3-step dropbacks to really go accordingly to, a college football quarterback. And then you couple that with they've got the number 2 graded PFF interior defensive lineman with Brandon Dorless as well. So you have the interior locked up with those two guys that are going to be, high NFL draft picks, only going to raise their ceiling with a guy like Dan Lanning there, who was able to get the most out of guys like Jordan Davis and Traven Walker. But you also have a DJ Johnson on the outside who looks like he is going to have the year that you can only dream about, kind of like a creative player, NCAA football type of defensive end year from DJ Johnson. So when you add all those guys up, all those talents, the PFF grades, the potential of DJ Johnson, and what Dan Lanning brings as the head coach to that defensive scheme, I've got them number 1. And, I think it's a fair list. I like Utah, right there, but I couldn't put the Ducks over them.
Yeah, and for all those reasons, they also dipped in the portal, got a couple players from Nebraska, got Sam, is it Taimani from Washington, so there is just a bevy of talent up there as well. And it's just the big question I have with Oregon, and that's probably, if I'm looking at it, with my bias, is just how do you put all that together in less than a year? And college football culture does matter a lot with these kinds of things. So is all that addition and change really going to come together? The talent's all there, and you mentioned Almave, like that is one dude that I love watching on tape. He plays hard, and it's a lot of fun to watch what he can do on the field. So I'm excited to see what they do with this group. And I think Oregon, Dan Lanning took a really interesting approach at Pac-12 Media Days, and maybe some of that is because he kind of knows what he's got in this group already, and so he wants to try and keep the conversation off of them as much to try and sneak up on people because, maybe people are writing them off a little bit after last season and the way that team just didn't compete how we expected them to against Utah in the championship game, right? And even talking to the Utah players a little bit, they were surprised that there wasn't more competitiveness. And I think some of that, just as we saw, things unfold, Cristobal leaves, Lanning comes in, really builds relationships, and that culture it feels like it's about to catch fire. So, I have to believe that if it comes down to the end of the year, it's one of those two groups that ends up the best group in the conference.
I love it, Brian. Were you at Pac-12 Media Day too?
I wasn't. So we have multiples out here at UteZone, and typically Steve Bartle goes out there, but Steve is kind of our beat reporter and everything like that. Had to take the week off for wifey's birthday, so we didn't send anybody out there, and I'm busy out here doing a lot of the high school coverage, so we just watched online. But that's the great part about media days is there's so much content to consume, and as you're listening to all these interviews and stuff like that, it's usually fascinating to me.
Well, you had a great reason to miss it, and just before we leave, I remember the last time we talked, we're both fellow huge Ted Lasso fans. We love the show Ted Lasso, very into it. Give me what Bryan Brown is binging right now, because I need recommendations. I just started Severance. Have you heard of Severance at all?
I have, yeah, and that's another one that's on my list. I just wrapped up binging out Billions. It's been one that I've been wanting to watch for a long time. Yeah, and I have to say season 6 was a disappointment. I don't know if I need to continue with it. Bobby Axelrod was my guy. I don't know if it's the ginger thing or what, but that was a good one. So I've got that going. Watch the first episode of Hard Knocks, and I tell you what, if Man Campbell doesn't get you fired up, you need to check your pulse. It's time to see the doctor, make sure that ticker's working properly, because I was ready to go watching it like 12 o'clock last night. Just let's go. I want to practice. So that's another one that's on the watch list right now. Man, it's been, I need to, like, Peaky Blinders. That's another one that's on the list as well. I've gotten away from the kind of the comedy feel good stuff, and the other part of it too is there's nothing wrong with a rewatch of old Ted Lasso.
I love it, dude. And it's hilarious that you brought it up, because my Dan Campbell joke right now is he is like a yoked Ted Lasso, what he's doing with the Detroit Lions. Like that
Ted
is
Lasso on roids. Yeah.
Yeah. Lasso that's like 6'6", just yoked out of his mind, former player. It has that similar feel, that positivity he brings and just the love he shows the players. But Bryan Brown, always great to see you, dude. Fun one. Let's get together again soon, man. I'm really looking forward to it. And if you do come out to Westwood, shoot me a text. That Friday night, we're going out before the game.
Absolutely. One of my favorite places to go. It's always a must hit, and you'll see Utah fans traveling mass to California, especially later in the year where it's freezing cold here and it's California weather year round over there. So looking forward to it for sure, man. And always a great time to be out here. I can't thank you enough for having me on, and it's a blast. That's the best part about this stuff is you meet great people and great fan bases, and that's why I love college football. And I'll be sad that this will end at some point in time, but in the meantime, we're just going to have a lot of good fun and some great drinks and some good food as well.
Love it, dude. And I will say this: UCLA moving to the Big Ten has nothing to do with Bryan Brown not coming. So we will definitely make sure he comes on. Bruin Bible.